I'm Ellen Snoeyenbos, the Library Director in West Bridgewater, and I'm here at the beach, ready to dig into some great summer reads that I thought I'd share with you. I have some suggestions for children, teens, and adults, and it's just, summer is such a great time to just do pleasure reading. Sometimes you get so busy during the year that you don't have time to just sit down and relax and dig into a book. And I always find in the summer I have larger blocks of time to really be able to read for pleasure. And one thing I'd really like to encourage parents to do is to read to your kids. I don't care if they know how to read yet or not. Everyone loves to be read to. And I have a couple of real winners that you'll find particularly good for an older group of kids and parents to read as a team. So starting with our children's collection, the first book I'd like to tell you about is just an incredible winner. It's We're All Wonders by R.J. Palacio. And many of you remember that she wrote that fabulous book called Wonder. I think they made a movie of it just a couple of seasons ago or recently. And it's about a boy who lives in this city with his wonderful parents, and he has a very dramatic physical abnormality to his head. But he's a really sensitive boy, and he has been homeschooled for quite a long time, and then he goes into the regular middle school, and the teachers and the principal and the kids are trying hard to adjust to his needs, and they find that he is just a wonderful addition to their classroom. That's the book Wonder. Now for younger kids, this is what she's done. She has done an absolutely gorgeous job of illustrating Augie's story, and I won't flip through every page, but the pictures are bright and vibrant, and it really deals with how shocked the kids are at the beginning when they see Augie, and how sad he feels, but then how he finds a way to use his imagination and this helmet that he wears outside so that people stop staring at him. And it's just a lovely, delightful story that you can read out loud and read over and over again, and then talk about what it's like to be different and how to fit in and how much do you really want to fit in. So that's an awesome choice. And I would say you could read that to 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, all the way up to early elementary. Another book that's really a funny book is Rodzilla. Rodzilla is written by Rob Sanders, and it is just a scream because Rodzilla is this monster who plays in his house, and of course, in the end, you find out who Rodzilla really is, and it's a real stitch. But it's a takeoff on the Godzilla theme, but told from pretty much of a baby's perspective, and it's just totally adorable. You'll get a real chuckle out of that one. Okay, the next book I have, it's actually a graphic novel, which are really popular with the younger set, and it's called Elle Defoe by C.C. Bell, I'm sorry. And it's about a girl who is deaf, but she has she gets a phonic ear, and what she discovers is that she can hear all sorts of things that she may not be supposed to hear. So it's a great story about, again, a child with some challenges. And it's just a wonderful story that the thing is everybody can relate to it, but it is about a girl who is deaf. And she becomes a superhero, Elle Defoe, with superpowers with her phonic ear. So it's really, really, really cute, extremely popular, and it's won all sorts of awards. Here's another funny one, though. This is called Tales of BunJitsu Bunny. And many kids might discover that this is an early chapter book with just not that many words on the page, but each of these chapters is actually a morality story based on, but in a Zen kind of context. So, just wonderful life lessons taught by BunJitsu Bunny, who knows much and is very philosophical. So let's see. One of the lessons is just about how to be a strong person doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be physically aggressive and that sort of thing. So that's a lot of fun, and I think will be very popular. Now here's a book I'm really excited about because, as I said before, it's so great to be able to read aloud as a family. This is the perfect read-aloud book to an entire family. It's called The Inquisitors Tale by Adam Gidwitz. And the thing is, you may remember Adam Gidwitz because he wrote, what did he write? A Tale Dark and Grim, which kids love. And this book is beautifully designed with lots of illustration, but it tells the story in a similar way to Chaucer telling the story of Canterbury Tales. It tells the story of these 3 children and this dog that travel across France in the high Middle Ages. You will learn so much about what life was like in the Middle Ages, but it's an action-adventure story, big time. And you've got this kid who is has been left at a monastery by his Muslim mother, who she had died, and he as a baby was left in this monastery. So he grows up as a monk, and then a girl who is modeled on Joan of Arc as a child, Jeanne, who sees visions and she has predilection about things. And then the 3rd child is Jacob, who is Jewish and has suffered a terrible catastrophe in his village. And he's been, the last words he heard from his parents was, "Go to Saint Denis and find our cousin." And so that's why he's traveling. And then they have this dog that comes with them. You meet all sorts of characters, and each chapter is told by someone who has experienced them, who's run into them, who knows them in some way, and moves the story of their adventure on. It's first of all, it's hysterically funny, but it's also really gripping. And the climax at the end is like just nail-biting. It's really exciting. It ends up at Mont Saint-Michel, which is a beautiful island kind of monastery castle on the shores of Brittany. Highly recommend this as a family read. Okay, another book that is just a delight for families would be A Dog Like Sam. Let me just flip to that. Oh, yeah. This one is so unusual. The chapters are very, 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 very short. Look at that, 2 pages. So I think a reluctant reader would really love this. And a story about a dog who doesn't love dogs. And this Sam, the family lives on a farm across the road from a really grouchy, kind of abusive farmer who had purchased Sam. He's a pedigree of some sort, but Sam doesn't like living at his house. Sam would prefer to live in the house with the family, with the kids. So he comes over all the time and interacts with the kids, interacts with their animals, and then sometimes has to be brought back to the other farm across the street, and then back and forth. What's great about this is there is a sequel. This was so popular that they ended up writing. The man ended up writing a sequel to it. But you'll just fall in love with Sam the dog, and the family is lovely too. And you're concerned for who really owns the dog and who's responsible for him. It's just a lovely quick read. Here's another awesome summer book called Jabari Jumps. Again, this is more of a picture book. But this tells the story of a little boy in the city, but it could be anywhere, and he's just trying hard to screw up his courage to jump off the high board in his neighborhood city pool. And so it goes through all of his worry, and his father's trying to encourage him, and it's just a simple story of taking that first jump, learning how to pull yourself together, preparing yourself, not getting too scared. And the illustrations are just absolutely breathtaking. They really make you feel like you're at the top of that high dive. Look at that. He's standing, he can look out over the city, and he's looking down, down, down into the pool. And then he decides that he will jump, and so he takes off, and it's just delightful. A small vignette kind of story, but one that you can read over and over again, and reminding kids that, you can do something hard if you prepare yourself. So that's a lovely story. Another fun one that I've just been introduced to, this is another great read aloud. Frog Kisser. Now, the reason I gravitated towards it was Garth Nix. Oh my gosh, he's like one of the best writers for kids and adults around. He's British. I think he lives in Australia now. And he wrote a lot of series, mostly fantasy. This is really fantasy and fairy tale because it's about two sisters. They're princesses. And they live with their stepfather, who is trying to be a bully and take over the country. And so he doesn't like the idea of the older girl, who actually is in line for the throne. He doesn't like the idea of her marrying someone because that takes away his chance of controlling everything. So he banishes her boyfriend from the neighboring country, and but before banishing him, he turns him into a frog, and so this poor kid is like hopping around the moat, and the girls have to figure out where's the frog, which frog is the boyfriend, and then they go on to a larger story about saving their kingdom from this evil stepfather of theirs. It's really great, and he's just a wonderful writer, and it's a fun read. Kind of goofy as well as fantasy. Sometimes fantasy is so serious. This is not. This is really fun. My last children's book is an absolute knock out of the park book. Super duper duper popular. It's called The Terrible Two, and you'll recognize some of the names of the authors because Mac Barnett has written a number of other books for children. And his friend Jory John is a writer too. Now the thing with this is their illustrator is Kevin Cornell. This book is about this kid, Miles, who has been the prankster of his school for years. But now, he's moving out of town. He's moving into the country. He's moving to this place that's just cows, it's full of cows. And he's, a city kid, so he thinks it's really ridiculous. And he goes to school for the first time thinking, well, I'll take over the school in terms of my prankstership. And this is some of the illustrations that you can see. The principal is just kind of a goofball. But he discovers that the school already has a prankster. So that puts a little bit of a twist in the story because the prankster that's already here is doing some really wild pranks. Miles is going like, whoa, I thought I was a good prankster. This kid is like even more sophisticated. And so they end up meeting up and doing things together, and it's just a total stitch. It's not dangerous pranking, but kind of goofy pranking. And this also has a sequel. All of these books that you see me talk about are at the West Bridgewater Public Library. But also, if our copy is out, don't forget you can place a hold on the title and have it delivered to us from another library in the network. And believe me, all the libraries have these books because they're very, very popular. Now, I'm going to move on to teen fiction because that was something I loved doing in my old setting was Book Talk Teen Books. Now, this is a book called The Diary of a Tokyo Teen. And it's a graphic novel. It's a true story. A Japanese-American girl travels back to the land of Japan, where her mother is from. But, she's been there before as a family. But this time, she is on her own. But she's traveling on her own, but she's staying with her grandmother. And it's just, a lot of kids are fascinated by Japan. Japan is like the hot country to know anything about and to visit. And you really do learn a lot about Japan. And there's some actual pictures of the author visiting a lot of places. And just some of the cultural differences and oddities that she's discovered about Japanese life. But she loves it. And she is part Japanese herself. So this is a lot of fun, and it's where it does actually take you on the trip with the girl. It's not boring at all, and she takes the subway by herself, and that's kind of like a scary thing at first. But I highly recommend this to teens, and especially for reluctant readers, where it is a graphic novel. But there's there's still a lot of text in it. The next book I have is called Cherub. Now, Cherub is the series name. This is Mission 1. I have been book talking this extensive series for, I would say, 5 years. Anyone that I have hooked up with this series has just devoured it. And it does come in different covers, so you're seeing a different cover from the one I'm holding, but they're the same book, believe me. Okay, this is the premise of this whole series. It's set in England, and the boy is really kind of turning into a juvenile delinquent. He's got a lot of family issues at home, and he's getting into real trouble. And so he gets caught in the midst of something and gets taken to a juvenile halfway house kind of place. Well, it's more than just that. They're recruiting for this secret cell of teens who their mission is to sort of burrow underneath the surface of a situation, discover what's going on, find out what the plot is, and then bring in the FBI. The MI5 is the British counterpart to the FBI. And for instance, in this case, in the recruit, they have to go. He has to go on a. He trains. First of all, they train him, which is very grueling, like boot camp kind of thing. And then he goes on a mission. He's going undercover to a place in Wales where a whole bunch of big-time corporation heads are meeting, and the MI5 has been given a tip that there's an eco-terrorist group that wants to blow them up. So his mission is to go in and become sort of part of the eco-terrorist group and deflect them from blowing up the conference center, and then call it. So it's fascinating. The thing about this is, okay, eco-terrorism. The next book is about another big hot social issue. There's I can't remember what the second one is, but it might be something like slavery, like having people, bringing people into a country under false pretenses, thinking they're going to get a job, and then they get stuck in a room, making things that they, in terrible conditions. That's one of the books I know. And then like the opium, poppies and things like that. So it's very exciting. And there are 10 in the series. So you are not going to run out of great reading material. Robert Muchamore has written other series as well. So if you like this one, you can feel assured that you'll have a lot of books in this series to read and other hit series by him. So highly recommend. The next book is The Name of the Star. Now this is a mystery. This is about an American girl who goes to London and she's enrolled in a boarding school. Now, unbeknownst to her, she has the ability to see ghosts and see spirits. And there is a terrible outbreak in London at this time of a serial killer, similar to Jack the Ripper. And the thing is that she has seen fleeting glances of him. She thinks it's him. And then he disappears, and then she sees him again. And it's very, 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 very suspenseful. And once he finds out that she can see him, of course he targets her. So it's very exciting. This also is a series. There are at least one, possibly two books in this series by Maureen Johnson. Another author you should know about if you're looking for books for teens. Maureen Johnson is a well-known teen author who writes just a rip-roaring read. The next book I have, it's a little different, but I think you're going to enjoy it. This is called Vincent and Theo. Truth be told, this is the kind of book that anyone, adult or teen, would very much enjoy. It's because it's considered a teen book just because it's very simple and the story moves ahead very quickly. But it's the story of the two brothers, Vincent and Theo Van Gogh. And of course, Vincent was the brilliant but very, very troubled artist. And Theo was his devoted brother, who was an art dealer. He had his own gallery. And he had to take care of Vincent. Vincent could not take care of himself. He was suicidal. He was very troubled. He had all sorts of mental health issues. And Theo loves his brother and knows he's a brilliant, brilliant artist. No one realizes this at the time. But Theo really, really supports Vincent in his art. He believes in him strongly. He provides him with show space. And then, you know, after Vincent's death, he is his chief promoter of Vincent van Gogh as, you know, the major 20th century or 19th century artist that he was. I highly recommend this, and everyone who has read it has agreed that it's just a great book that gives a really good insight into the art world of the Impressionists. Now, for all of you zombie lovers, of which there are many, you've probably seen the movie World War Z, and I know my 30-something daughter was addicted to The Walking Dead and all those kinds of series. The book by Max Brooks, World War Z, is really gripping. And of course, it's set in a dystopian future in America, and there's been a plague. Many, many people have died or been turned into these, you know, subhuman beings. And so those that are left, the few humans, fully human people that are left, need to find a way to survive in this devastating world that they find themselves in. So this is a beach read for those of you who love zombies and dystopian future. Here's another book that's in a pretty long series. It's called The Alchemist by Michael Scott. And I'm pretty sure there are at least 6 or 7 books in this series. Now, for those of you who are Harry Potter fans, you'll remember that Nicholas Flamel was the medieval alchemist who was trying to find the Sorcerer's Stone and to be able to create eternal life. So this is set in today's times, and the kids are in San Francisco. But Nicholas Flamel has reappeared after all these centuries. But he's become an evil person. And he is, after world domination, of course. And this starts out with just an incredibly dramatic start. The bookstore that the kids are working in is blown up. And of course, Nicholas Flamel is hoping that everybody dies in the bookstore, but they escape. And they escape across the Golden Gate Bridge, and they're seeking this sort of retreat place that they've been told about, where all of the Greek gods are gathering. And so it's just a fabulous tale, and there are at least 4 or 5 in this series. And again, it's fantasy, but it's high action adventure as well. Okay, next we have a book that I don't have the actual book itself because I sillily left it back at the library. We have 5 copies. It's called Everything, Everything by Nicola Yoon. It's a really touching book. I think we purchased 5 copies for our hot summer read table because we know it's going to be very, very popular. And this is the story of a girl who she has to live in a bubble because she has no immunity. So she lives always in her house. Her mother has to keep the house incredibly clean, and it's a lonely life. But she's a very sensitive girl. She does a lot of writing, and she reads all the time, of course. And come to find out, across the way, a new family has moved into town. And the boy in that family thinks it's very curious that he sees that there's a girl over there, but he never sees her come out of the house. So one night, he secretly climbs into her bedroom window, and they become friends. And he's in a lot of trouble with his family because he's one of these really spontaneous people who just never thinks, he just acts. And she finds that so fascinating because she has to think about everything. She can't take anything for granted. She has to think about every step she makes. And he's like the opposite. He's like, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this, let's do that. And so they are kind of a meeting of two opposite personalities, opposite situations, and they become friends, and it becomes romantic, and it's really a lovely story. Okay, next on the list is The Fifth Wave, another dystopian future book. And this is by Rick Yancey. Oh my gosh, he's written a ton of really gory, really creepy, high on the ick factors books. One of them is called The Monster Fist, I think it is. Anyway, it's about people digging up graves in the 19th century. It's crazy. Anyway, this is a book about aliens who've come to the Earth, but they look like people, so you don't know who's an alien and who's a real person. And they're basically after world domination, of course, like everything is. And it follows the line of, you know, this group of people who, you know, are trying to find a safe haven in an America that has been pretty much destroyed by this alien invasion. And it's great. There are 3 books in this series. I know it's been a movie. And so for those of, you know what I always say, if you like the movie, read the book. A lot of people say like, oh, you should read the book before you see the movie. You know, I actually feel the opposite. I think watching the movie first, you're not disappointed because you don't know the book yet. And then if you watch the movie first and then read the book always has more depth and more character development and more nuance, and you're going to enjoy it even more. And the fact that you already know what's going to happen doesn't take away from the excitement of the book at all. So I highly recommend, if you've seen the movie, read the book anyway, because honestly, it'll be a really great experience. So the next book I have for you is called Origin. This I found fascinating. It's set in the jungles of the Amazon jungle, okay? It's a research community of scientists, and they have discovered that a native tribe has an amazing, has developed an amazing affinity towards long life. And so they're trying to figure out, like, how can we use what they've got? And they end up creating this girl. What's her name? Pia. Pia is kind of a product, like she's a test tube baby way out there in the Amazon. And she is unable to be killed. Her skin doesn't get punctured. She's able to withstand all sorts of things. But, you know, what does that mean? There's a lot of implications with that. Then, of course, a boy from the tribe who's working at the research station meets her. They fall in love, and then he encourages her to escape because he doesn't think that the scientists have the good of humanity or the good of Pia in mind for her future. So he tries to help her escape from the science research center. Really exciting book. And there's more than one of this series, too. Here's a really beautiful, very, very popular graphic novel, Amulet. Amulet is the story of this family. The prologue tells the story of a terrible tragedy that befalls the family. And then a few years later, 2 years later, the mother takes the children to live in her grandfather's ancient and spooky house. And so they drive, and then they end up in this place, and they find this amulet. And an amulet is like a charm that usually has powers. And this series is got quite a few books in it. The first one here is The Stone Keeper. Book 1 is The Stone Keeper. And there's all sorts of crazy monsters. It's very exciting and dramatic. And the house is almost a character in and of itself. And, of course, they find the amulet, and all sorts of things happen to them. And the thing with a graphic novel, you You can read this in one sitting, no problem at all. A lot of these books you can easily read in one sitting, and this one in particular I think you'll find particularly fun. And kids love it when there's a sequel, so that has a lot of sequels to it. The next book, honestly, one of my very, 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 very favorite books. This is called The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. Now, some of you literary buffs will know that Sherman Alexie is a Native American poet, short story writer, and essayist. His work is frequently found in the New Yorker. And he wrote this. You can see from the picture on the screen that it won the National Book Award when it came out. I read this. This also has some illustration, which is fun. The kid in this story lives on a reservation in Washington State, and he has that condition where you have like water on your brain, so he has to be careful. But life on the reservation is very rough and tumble, so his parents are, worried for him. He's really, really smart kid, and he also likes to doodle and draw, and he's a kind of a cartoonist. Well, what happens is, how the whole story sets up is that his English teacher at the reservation high school, he goes to the kid's, what's the kid's name? Junior. He goes to Junior's parents and say, you know what, Junior really has potential. Junior, I want you to think about sending Junior to the white school off the reservation so he can take AP classes. He can, he can get more of an education than I can provide him here on the reservation school, which is a sad situation to find yourself in. And the parents are like, oh, I don't know. And he's not sure either. He's got his friends and his relatives on the reservation. He doesn't know whether they'll fit in the other school. Finally, they decide, okay, you know what, let's give it a try. He goes, his father has to drive him, off on his old pickup truck and drop him off at the school in town. The thing was that I thought that this book was going to be one of these sort of poor me victimization stories. Absolutely not. Junior becomes so popular in his school. He joins the basketball team, and he gets a girlfriend, and then there's the prom, and it's just absolutely just a fabulous story, juxtaposing two different cultures, certainly, that exist in our country. Native American Spokane Indian culture, and then just sort of generic, white bread, white culture. And he has to have a foot in both worlds. And of course, his reservation friends see him as a sellout. They get mad at him. Oh, you think you're too good for us. And so he has to kind of prove his loyalty to them as well. This is just a wonderful story. I used this as a read for my teen discussion group that I had in Duxbury. Everyone loved it. We ended up having a 3-hour conversation about what does it mean to belong to a tribe, because Junior belongs to 2 different tribes. And, how many tribes do you belong to? You've got your friends at school. You may have your friends at home. You may know people at church, camp sometimes. If you go to camp, you have your own circle of friends there. And are you a different person at each tribe? So it's a really wonderful story, easy, quick read. Those are all my teen books. Now we're on to adult books, and I have a few really great choices to read this summer. Now, as many of you may know from visiting the library, this summer is the summer of the Henry David Thoreau bicentennial. Henry David Thoreau, the wonderful naturalist and philosopher, member of the Transcendentalist movement, was born 200 years ago in Concord, Massachusetts. So we're doing a lot of activities in West Bridgewater related to that. But I decided it would be a fun thing to offer as for our hot summer read table, this book written by Susan Cheever, who is John Cheever's daughter, fabulous writer in and of herself, and it's called American Bloomsbury. Now, you may not know very much about the Transcendentalists. There was Emerson and Thoreau and Alcott and Nathaniel Hawthorne, Margaret Fuller. I didn't know all that much before I read American Bloomsbury. You know, I knew them. I'd read Walden, of course, in high school, and, you know, I'd run into them. But I didn't know how they all connected. If you're curious to know how they all connect, take it from me. This is a great read that really focuses a chapter on each of the people and takes them through the chronology of those early years of the 19th century. So you've got a chapter, and in fact more than one chapter, on Hawthorne, who married into the Peabody family. And they would all meet in Ralph Waldo Emerson's parlor and talk about philosophy and all the new things that they'd been reading from Indian philosophy, the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. And then, of course, across the street from Emerson's house was the family of girls in Orchard House, which were the Alcotts. Bronson Alcott was the father, and his daughter, Louisa May Alcott, was the writer who wrote Little Women, one of our perennial favorites. It's so interesting to read how everyone connects, and you really do get a sense of the dynamism of this group of people. It's why it's called American Bloomsbury. It is reminiscent of the Bloomsbury group in London back in the 1920s, which included many writers whose names I can't remember right now, Virginia Woolf being one of them, and her husband. But there were many writers in that group, and they kind of fought, and they loved, and they were a little competitive with each other. But ultimately, by being a group of intellectuals together, they raised the bar for each of them. All of them ended up writing just masterpieces, and the same is true of the American Bloomsbury crowd, the Transcendentalists. All lived someplace around the Boston, Concord area, and had an enormous impact on American thought, on environmentalism, social justice issues. And so if you want to know about them, this is just a really fascinating, very easy to read book with short chapters and just almost like a chatty kind of style. Put that one over here. Next we have A Piece of the World, which I don't have a copy of with me, but I know you can see it on the screen. Okay, this is really interesting. How many of you know the Andrew Wyeth painting, Christina's World? I think it resides at the MoMA down in New York, at the Museum of Modern Art. I think that's its resting place. But anyway, it's the very dramatic, realistic painting of the woman sitting kind of on an angle in the field, looking over towards the house. Well, anyway, Christina Baker Klein has been wondering, who was Christina? And why was she kind of the muse of Andrew Wyeth? Now, this is a book that is based on historical truth, but it is a novel. So very, very well written, and you really get a feeling for the relationship between Christina and the artist. So that's a great, really interesting summer read. The next book I want to tell you about is called Faithful. And this is by Alice Hoffman. I mean, she has written so many books. I almost always love what she's written. Now, Faithful, is this a teen book or is this an adult book? It could kind of go either way. The main character is a teen, but it's marketed as an adult book. The setup of this story is that there was a terrible car crash late one night in New Hampshire on an icy road. The girl, what's her name? Shelby, was driving. The car crashes. Her very, very best friend is put into a coma as a result. And she feels such guilt and remorse. She drops out of school. Her mother takes care of her. She doesn't know what to do. She's in a vegetative state. Her friend is lying in bed and is virtually a vegetable, but is still alive. But obviously her life has been completely changed. Shelby survives and is whole, but she feels guilty about that. And this book called Faithful is the story of how Shelby with excruciating pain, lifts herself out of her situation, goes to New York, and really tries to create a life for herself, still harboring a lot of brokenness inside. It's a lovely story. It's a story about redemption and forgiveness, and how do you move on from a tragedy. Highly recommend it. I used to be a big fan of Tony Hillerman. The guy who, he's dead now, but he wrote a lot of those Joe Leaphorn murder mysteries. They were always set in the Four Corners section of the Southwest. Well, this is his daughter, Anne Hillerman, and she kind of is taking the Leaphorn Chi story to the next level. So she uses the characters that her father created in his Joe Chi and Joe Leaphorn and his sidekick. I can't remember the sidekick's name, but Jim Chi and Joe Leaphorn, and is just continuing on the stories. And she's a wonderful writer. And for those of you who read all the Hillerman murder mysteries, you'll be thrilled to know that she's carrying on the tradition. Song of the Lion is her first book in that series. Two Good Dogs. Now, we talked about one dog book earlier, which is more of a kid's book. Who doesn't love a good dog story? There are so many great ones. And this one's called Two Good Dogs by Susan Wilson. And it's really, of course, it's supposedly about the dogs, but it's also about the people that own the dogs. And, it's single mom Skye Mitchell has sunk her last dime into her dream, and she decides to move up to Maine and open a hotel. And, in the Berkshires, I'm sorry, I thought it was Maine. And she meets someone, she has dogs, she meets somebody else with a dog. It's kind of one of those kind of stories. And it's just really a delightful story that starts out with the dog, focus on the dogs, but of course it's all really about the people involved. And it's romantic, and it's kind of a wholesome family story. So there's that one. Now the next book I have, I want to talk about, I don't have a copy of because it's just so darn popular. It's A Gentleman in Moscow. And it's by Amar Towles. Now, if you read Amar Towles' Rules of Civility, which I loved, that was set in the 30s in New York. This one is set in the early part of the 20th century in Moscow. And it's about a prince. He's not really a prince, but he's like he's in the aristocracy. And he's a young man at the time it opens. And he has, it's right around 1917, the Russian Revolution. When the revolution starts, he's in France, so he could stay there if he wanted to, but he doesn't stay because he would be safe. But he goes back to Russia because the woman who raised him, his grandmother, is still on their family estate, and he knows he has to get her out. And so he goes back to Russia. Now, the reason that he's not killed is that he had written this very socialist poem that is attributed to him, and so that kind of saves him from the firing squad. And instead of killing him, the Bolsheviks tell him, you have to live the rest of your life in this hotel, the Metropole Hotel, which does exist. And so he moves into the Metropole, and the book is kind of about all the people that he meets that either live in the Metropole or pass through the Metropole, and he takes on responsibility for some of them, and he's got this long-range plan as far as the end result of his life. He falls in love. He takes care of people. It's just a beautiful. It took me a while to read it because I just didn't want to read it too fast. It was one of those books that you just savor. Beautifully written, wonderful characters, kind of an interesting, quirky situation. You wonder how in the world he's going to keep his sanity staying in the hotel. He ends up becoming the maitre d' of the restaurant. And so he's got that going for him. Of course, he listens. He hears all about what's going on. because it's like the Metropole is right across the street from the Kremlin. So he knows all about what's going on with the Kremlin crowd. And Americans come through, and actresses come through, and ballet dancers come through, and it's totally fascinating. It spans about, I would say, 20, 25 years. It's fiction. Now, don't take this as literal truth by any means. It's fiction set in a very fascinating era of Russian history. And Amor Towles did a lot of research so that the details around the story are correct. So I highly recommend that. And then another book, the next book I have to talk about, which I don't have a copy of too, is Ready Player One. Now, you may be a gamer. If you're a gamer, if you love video games, this too was a book I used with a teen group. It's an adult book, though. It's called Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. It's set in a somewhat dystopian future. The Earth, we're losing our resources. So people are living in like stacks of containers. You know those big containers that are shipping containers? They've sort of stacked up these shipping containers. And the story is about this boy who lives in a shipping container, and he pretty much, all he does is pretty much play video games. And the video game has become his life. And the way that the government is controlling people is by kind of seducing them into just playing the video game over and over again. And he's realizing that how much is he able to follow? Well, it turns out he discovers that there's a renegade video gamer who is hacking into the video game that everybody's playing and leaving Easter eggs around, and he's trying to find the answer. So he and this girl are in a competition to solve the problem that this gamer, this master gamer, has set up. And the two of them are racing through the game itself and racing through the country, trying to find the answers to the questions that are being posed by in this video game by this master gamer. It's really fascinating. I know this was a movie, but it kind of came and left quickly. And I have to say, I think it would be tough to do it justice as a movie. I'm not sure that the movie would have been able to be successful. The book is fascinating and a real page-turner. I highly recommend it. The next book is one that I'm reading, currently reading. It's called The Last Days of Night. And that is our West Bridgewater Book Club book for June. We're going to be talking about the last week of June. And it is the fascinating story. It's fiction again. It's fiction, but the characters are real people, of the competition between Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse. Now, everybody sees Edison as discovering electricity and creating the first light bulb. Well, that's not exactly true. There were many light bulbs. It's kind of like the story of aviation. Many people were building planes, and who you attribute the actual, the Wright brothers are attributed with the achievement, but many people were working on it well before the Wright brothers. Similarly, many people had worked on the light bulb before Thomas Edison patented his brand of light bulb. And George Westinghouse improved on it, but Edison is suing George Westinghouse because he said, "You're infringing on my patent for the light bulb." And Westinghouse is saying, like, "I've improved it. I'm making it possible for people to actually put it in their homes, whereas yours is just kind of like an accident waiting to happen." The main character in the story is the very young, kind of wet behind the ears lawyer for George Westinghouse. And another character who shows up in the story is Nikola Tesla, who all kids probably know about Tesla in terms of the car, but Nikola Tesla was intimately involved in the discovery and development of electricity, too. So he was a really brilliant man. I'm really enjoying reading this. I'm not finished with this yet, but it's been a very fun read. And if you like historical fiction, you're just going to eat this up because it's fascinating. It's set in like 1917, around then, when electricity is just coming into use. Okay, just a couple more books I want to tell you about. This book is The Secret History of Wonder Woman. When this first came out, I was like, I'm really not into superheroes. I know some people are, but it's not my... But then I listened to Terry Gross interviewed Jill Lepore about this book, and I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I am totally going to read this because it's a fascinating story. It's the story of, let's see, what was his name? William Moulton Marston. Grew up right outside of Boston, and he was a feminist. He grew up in a house of women, and he went to Harvard and kind of wanted to be a writer. He was he was a very sheltered child, so he'd never really run into a lot of obstacles in his path before. And when he went to college, he had to take classes that were more difficult than he wanted to get involved in. But anyway, he managed to stick it out, and then he marries his childhood sweetheart, who was at Mount Holyoke, which of course is the first women's college in America. And he just becomes this huge fan of women's lib and the suffragette movement. And he decides to create this superhero character, Wonder Woman, based on the concept of an Amazon, a tribe of Amazons living on an island in the Mediterranean. And one day this American pilot crashes on their island, and they take care of him. They nurse him back to health. And then this girl, whose name, I'm really bad at names, she is chosen, Wonder Woman, the character of Wonder Woman, I think it's Claire, is chosen to take him back, flying, of course, all the way under her own power. She flies him back to America and then stays because he wants her to stay and help with military intelligence. And so she hides. She's kind of like Clark Kent. She becomes a secretary and is undercover. And then when she's needed, of course, she bursts out with her fancy bra and cape and everything. But the story of how Wonder Woman came to be, and the people in it are, he just continues to lead this very bohemian life. He is married to this woman, and then he has an affair with someone else that he moves into his house. So there's like a kind of a man with two wives, but she's not considered his wife. She's considered the housekeeper or the child care person. But she's actually, has a relationship with him. He has 2 children with his wife, 2 children with the mistress, and they all take care of each other. And it's all one big happy family, if you can believe it. It's a fascinating, really fascinating story, and I highly recommend it even to people who are not into superheroes. Because again, it's based on a true. It actually is. This is nonfiction. Jill Lepore is a nonfiction writer. She's a teacher of American history in Harvard. All of her books are fascinating, and so I do highly recommend reading this. I heard her interviewed, and she really, kind of in a nutshell, whetted my appetite for this book. So I think you'll feel the same way. And then last but not least, because we are in Boston and we all love the Red Sox, this is David Ortiz' autobiography. And you know what? He did it with a ghostwriter. Okay. It's still fascinating. And really, it just really shows his personality. He's just this nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. He's not really hiding anything. He talks about his upbringing. He's had a very strict family upbringing in the Dominican Republic. But they were very, very poor, of course, and he was kept off the streets, and he found baseball, and just that he really, really latched onto that. And then moving to America, following his baseball career, and then becoming a rich person. He talks about what a struggle that can be when you grow up poor, and all of a sudden you have all this money. And I found it really touching how he said, when you first get your money, give it to your parents. And that's what he did when he first started really becoming comfortably well off. He, bought a house for his parents. He gave his money to his parents. They were able to pay off some debt, and it helped the rest of his family quite a bit. So Pappy, my story, I just think is a great choice for baseball fans and other people as well to get a feeling for what David Ortiz's life was like, moving to America and becoming the cultural hero that he is. So these are my suggestions for summer reads. Obviously, it's by no means a complete list. Swing by the library because we're going to be setting up our Hot Summer Read table that will have multiple copies of a few of these, but also other books that you might find interesting. We try to make it as browsable as possible. And I just hope all of you have a wonderfully relaxing summer and read as much as you can because it's so enjoyable to get through a good book. I highly recommend it. So we'll see you at the library.